This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post, coming to you from the Fort Hall School of Government in Nairobi, Kenya. In this segment, we take a look at some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 10th of November, 2022, and I am AX.
I am 2M.
And I am 2J. And in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, freedom has come. In the Standard, big names in race for EALA slots.
Yeah.
In the Star, state varsities plan to reverse C+ entry grade. And in the People Daily, big names miss out on EALA jobs. 2M. What shocking things do you want to tell us today?
Not that shocking, but it's only been 57 days in office and William Ruto has already bagged more than $500 billion in foreign investments. That's a record. It has never happened since independence. That's just from one country, the United Kingdom. The last time a president bagged anything near $500 billion was when President Uhuru Kenyatta went to China in 2014 and came back with 1/3 of $1 trillion in investment deals. Bravo, Your Excellency William Ruto. Never thought you'd do so well internationally. And by the way, the suits and the blue and red ties look very presidential. Please leave the yellows ties to Rigathi. But even in Ruto's diplomatic successes, we want to throw some words of caution. In our view, Ruto should be aware of the potential diplomatic traps that are being laid for him. And in our view, there are two traps. One is from Pakistan, and two is from KDF's role in Eastern DRC. This week, Pakistan contradicted Kenya's official government report on the slain Pakistani journalist Ashad Sharif, who was shot and killed in Magadi a few weeks ago. The Pakistani say Sharif was tortured for 4 hours and then shot in the head. This contradicts the mistaken identity theory of the Kenyan government. Now, whichever side is right, any logical player would see the trajectory Pakistan is headed with this. By contradicting Kenya's version of events, they are in effect saying Kenya's government is lying or covering up Sharif's killing. And if Kenya's government is lying, then the head of state is also lying. That would be the insinuation. The second thing that happened this week, M23 rebel leader Willy Ngoma warned Ruto of mutual assured destruction should KDF fire at M23 in Eastern DRC. He said, "Otumalize tukufe sisi wote." Loosely translated, you bring war to us, we'll dish it back to you as well. This warning must also be seen in the context of Muhoozi, or General Muhoozi's statement on M23. He said, as for M23, I think it is very, very dangerous for anybody to fight those brothers of ours. They are not terrorists. They are fighting for the rights of Tutsis in DRC. What's my point here? Ruto should learn from Winston Churchill. One evening in 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, when leaving the House of Commons, a member of Parliament, Mrs. Bessie Braddock, hit Churchill with an insult saying, "Winston, you are drunk, and what's more, you are disgustingly drunk." Churchill fired back at the mannerless MP with an insult too, saying, "Bessie, my dear, you are ugly, and what's more, you are disgustingly ugly. But tomorrow I shall be sober, and you will still be disgustingly ugly." President Ruto should have a rogue, a refined Oscar Sudi type that responds to anyone that goes after Ruto in the diplomatic space. And the premise here is do them before they do you. And if they do you before you do them back. Ruto should not recite poetry to men brandishing swords.
Very interesting. So in other news, today President William Ruto chaired the first meeting with his new cabinet. And because we have great respect for Mr. Ruto, we want to be honest with him. Sir, you need to change your tact. The country is tired of politics. What we want now is leadership. And we believe that the only way to make this shift is to start with the boys and girls in your cabinet.
Yes.
Now, the reason we call them boys and girls is because they are inexperienced and they have much learning to do. When they speak, they forget that they are representing you. And left uncommanded, Kuria, Rigiji, and the rest will continue to do damage to your government. So allow us to share a story that may inspire you as you seek solutions. Once upon a time, a young Muslim man was set to marry the worst woman in town. This was against the advice of everybody, including the woman's own father.
Yes.
Now, the young man's friends and family feared for his life as he organized the wedding.
Yes.
But on their wedding night, as the young couple sat alone for dinner, the husband turned to a dog nearby and demanded that it fetch him some water. The dog, obviously, could not comply. So the husband took out his sword and he cut the dog up into little pieces.
Yes.
Okay.
Next, he turned to a cat. And of course, the same thing happened.
Yes.
So he cut the cat up into tiny little pieces.
Yes.
Finally, he asked his horse. And when the animal did not comply, he screamed, "You horse! Do you think that because you are the only horse I have, I will not spare you, as if you do not do as I say?"
Yes.
And so he killed the horse.
Yes.
Then he turned to his frightened wife and politely asked her to get him some water. And of course, she complied.
Fantastic.
The strong and bad-tempered woman was broken.
Lovely.
Now, when it became apparent that the young man had succeeded in taming this girl, his father-in-law tried to do the same thing with his own wife by killing a rooster. His wife laughed at him and said she knows him too well for that to work on him. And she said, "Now, my love, you're a little late. It wouldn't matter to me now if you killed even 100 chickens. You should have started sooner, for now we know each other." What is the moral here? In your dealings with others, always let them know what you expect of them. It is easier to be tough and consistent from the very beginning than to try and rectify casualness by becoming tough later. And we can apply this lesson in our very own politics.
Yes.
When Uhuru Kenyatta grew tired of his deputy Ruto, he told him to stand down. He bought excavators and he taught us about riparian land. He arrested people and accused them of corruption. He even embarrassed Ruto when our neighbors refused to let him land on their soil. Uhuru used all of his ammunition to weaken his deputy. But just like the wife who had been married for years, Ruto laughed at Uhuru. They knew each other so well that these political threats would not work on him. Uhuru was not tough on his deputy from the beginning, and so they had become equals. But should Ruto hear this lesson and apply it, he should do so with Gachagua and his cabinet now.
Yeah.
He should cut up dogs, cats, and horses while looking for water,
Yes.
knowing that by the time he turns to his subordinates, they will do as asked in fear. He will have tamed them. And maybe this was a plan all along. If loose lips sink ships, did Ruto allow his eager and unseasoned cabinet secretaries to run their mouths to reveal the liabilities?
Oh.
Maybe Ruto is well aware of their flaws. And the solution will be to borrow from Uhuru's cabinet strategy. Control everything. But before that happens, we urge the new crop of CSs to study law number 4 from the 48 laws of power.
Yes.
Always say less than necessary. The more you say, the more common you appear.
Yes.
The more you say, the more likely you are to appear foolish. And I say this with all due respect.
So now, on the question of foolishness, and I also say this with all due respect, yesterday, former Kiambu Governor Ferdinand Waititu gave justification for UDA's desire to remove the presidential term limits. Waititu framed it in the need to limit greed and stop corruption. He said, and I quote, that term limits are dangerous when greedy leaders take over power. They will know that they have to exit, so they tend to work for their own interests, end quote. And although UDA officially distanced themselves from this plan, Waititu's attempt to justify it must be studied, because it confirms a core aspect of the UDA playbook, making the unreasonable look reasonable. And this feat can only be done with the help of useful idiots. And that is what I want to talk about today. A useful idiot is a person who the government uses to peddle propaganda. The useful idiot doesn't even know what they are doing. What makes them useful is that they can be extremely persuasive to a particular group of people who are distrusting of the government. Now, might Waititu be UDA's next useful idiot? Is it possible that he is being used to sell UDA's plan to remove term limits to the Gama nation? First, Waititu is useful because as a UDA member not holding office, he is perfectly positioned to peddle this plan's alleged benefits to Gama. He wields no power and his utterances can have little consequence. And as a former governor of Kiambu, Baba Yao carries some sway with the mountain. Altogether, he's able to convince one of Kenya's largest voting blocs to agree to change our nation's constitution, thus making victory more likely in a referendum. These facts make him very useful. But where does the idiocy come in? It is in the justification that Waititu peddles. You know, if you don't think about it, Waititu's logic can massage the mind into stupidity. And here is this logic. If you know you will only have 10 years to eat, then you will eat more and share less. But if you know that you have 40 years to serve, you may temper your hunger in favor of country, because you know you have the time to be selfless. This so-called logic makes the unreasonable look reasonable. But reality reveals that Waititu's logic is just wrong. History tells us that there is no guarantee that removing term limits will reduce greed or stop leaders from acting in their own self-interests. For example, Kenya's most famous corruption scandal, Goldenberg, was instituted before presidential term limits were introduced. According to former finance PS Wilfred Koinange, Moi allegedly pocketed $76 million or nearly 20 billion shillings when adjusted for inflation.
Wow.
Put differently, Moi allegedly pocketed nearly 1% of Kenya's GDP in 1992, a time before presidential limits. And if an age limit of 75 had been instituted, Moi would still have been able to govern in his own interests, because in 1992 he was only 68.
Very clever.
More recently, we only need to look at Uganda to see what happens when leaders don't have limits. In light of these facts, how then can Waititu argue that removing presidential limits will manage self-interest? But perhaps facts don't matter. Perhaps it is not about how truthful Waititu is, but about how his argument makes country feel reasonable. Might Baba Yao be UDA's next useful idiot by making the unreasonable reasonable? Might he be laying the groundwork for not only a president for life, but governors for life as well? Just think about that.
Beautiful.
That's a good point. Never thought of that. Wow, guys. I hope that we're not going to be called at some point into some office to answer for our thoughts.
And to ask
Useful idiot.
Anyway, on that note, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines by. We ask ourselves, are the headlines topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and finally, thoughtful or just plain lazy? Okay. The Star, state varsities plan to reverse C+ entry grade. We're in agreement. Toss the Star. I think we can look at the Standard and the People Daily together because they both are in reference to the IALA elections.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, IALA is the East African Legislative Assembly, and members are elected by their respective country's national assembly. So of course we have 9 slots and each member submits 9 slots. And I think, as both headlines tell us, there are more than 9 people interested in taking up these positions. The People Daily tells us that some people have already dropped out, the likes of Gideon Moi and others. Winnie Odinga has nominated herself to be one of those members. I guess this has become some sort of political orphanage, right?
Yes.
For those who did not succeed in the elections in Kenya.
It's a home for the political destitute.
It is. They'll have a good time in Dodoma, I suppose. All right. I think this is not very interesting of a topic. I don't care about political orphans very much. So I think we toss the Standard and the People Daily.
Yes.
Lastly, we are left with the Daily Nation. Freedom has come.
I love it. Sarcastic headline, that is.
But freedom has come for who?
For Rigathi Gachagua. And this is with regard to DPP withdrawing the 7.4 billion shilling case. Look, I don't know what people think about this, but I don't wish anyone, bad with prosecution and all that. But if DPP is telling us DCI gave him defective files during his reign, DCI cannot, then I think it's only fair he withdraws all the cases DCI gave him and he starts afresh.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I guess my only concern or worry is for the 7 million people who voted for William Ruto. They woke up this morning and they saw this headline in reference to the deputy president.
Correct.
And they are sat there asking themselves, but when will our freedom come?
Freedom has come for who?
Exactly, for who?
Yeah.
So, okay, the twist on words, the sarcasm,
Yeah.
100%, I give it.
Yeah.
Should we award it our winning headline?
Yes.
Okay, agreed. The Daily Nation gives us our winning headline. On to the political pieces that we call cartoons, but we also have a 3-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is the cartoon humorous or dry? You know what? Is a cartoon good
Oh, bad.
or bad? That is a new criteria, straight to the point. Okay, Tua, why don't you kick us off with the standard?
Standard Gado, and I think that's a beautiful, beautiful cartoon. You have a caricature of William Ruto as Commander-in-Chief, and he's wielding the Bible, and he's walking towards Wanjiko, who's wielding the Constitution, Katiba. You can see it there. And I think what Gado is playing here on is Kenya Kwanza's affiliation to the church.
Yes.
And also with, I don't know whether you remember during the inauguration when William Ruto was given the Constitution, he did not show it to the masses. He took it and he put it on the side, but when he got the sword, he lifted it down and showed it to the people. Meaning that I think the cartoon is basically telling us, put the Constitution aside, he prefers the Bible, but Wanjiko is telling us he is a Katiba. And I think the other thing here is Ruto swore to protect the property and and the livelihoods of people. When people are dying of hunger, when people are starving, I think what he's telling Ruto is to uphold his oath of office.
Yeah. The last thing he wants is the people to revolt against him.
Absolutely,
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, AX, the
Yes.
star.
All right, so in the Star cartoon today, we have President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, is standing by an open door, about to welcome President Ruto through it. The door is the passport of Kenya, and the drapes that frame the door are the Republic of South Africa's visitor's visa. As you know, yesterday in a joint presser, we were told that as a Kenyan, if you want to travel to South Africa, now you can, which
Yes.
is visa free
Yes.
for 90 days.
90 days.
Yes.
But people must know that this process actually began in
Yes.
January this year,
Yeah.
when President Uhuru Kenyatta did a state visit to South Africa, and they had a committee sitting to harmonize border issues.
Yeah.
And this committee is what has decided on this.
Yeah.
And I think that all of this is in conjunction with that the agreement to have a pan-African airline between South African
And
Airways
Kenya.
and Kenya Airways, so that it's
Beautiful.
it's integrated.
Beautiful.
So I'll see you guys in South Africa in January.
Come
Right?
on, piano.
Find me in Diani.
Okay. All right. I think for being a bit of a basic cartoon, I think we toss the star.
Okay.
And we can quickly look at the Daily Nation.
Yeah.
So in the Daily Nation, this is Ndula.
Yeah.
We have a caricature of Kenya Airways planes being depicted as bird skeletons. And a judge with a gavel for a head is dragging a KQ pilot to board the plane.
To fly it.
To fly it. That's true. So the context here is that there was a court order telling the pilots that they had to resume work, and so
Yeah.
they ended their strike. It's a bit worrying. I think if you say that you cannot tax yourself into prosperity, then at the same time this must apply that you cannot adjudicate yourself into order. You can't have the judges telling pilots who have every right to strike, in terms of labor law, telling them that they have to return back to work or else.
Yeah.
I think the cartoon here also showing KQ to be but a mere skeleton of its great
former
self.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. But
Okay.
I do love the way the KQ management has treated their pilots. Told them, go back to work, we'll fire you and hire more pilots.
Hire what? A
Hire-
matatu driver?
Hire more pilots. And you know what? They've caved in. The way the whole thing has been managed, the pilots have their tails between their legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this conversation will be revisited at some point. I think this is just a bandage on a conversation that is not over. Okay, so what do we say? We toss the star.
Yes.
I think we toss the Daily Nation.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
2M, I'm feeling that you want to award the winning cartoon
Gado.
to Gado. Yes, if there's one thing you love, it is violence. All right, so there you have it. That is our show for today. We have a winning headline from the Daily Nation and a winning cartoon from Gado of the Standard. Don't forget, you can find us on your TV screens. We're on Prime Free to Air, GoTV, and Star Times. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you tomorrow for
Sabbath Truth.
Sabbath Truth. Good evening.
Bye.
God bless.